Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Primetime. So Primetime is a Bethel Library. It's a collaborative project between friends of the Bethel Library, faculty development, and other offices on campus, where we celebrate the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, students, and staff. Most presentations are recorded and found in the Bethel Digital Library. Be sure to check the library's news and events page and the Bethel calendar for what's coming up on the schedule. On March 10th, Thursday, Ruth Schaefer shared stories and insights concerning her experiences while studying, traveling, living, and interning in New Zealand during the fall of 2015 through a HECUA Higher Education Consortium of Urban Affairs program. It's a really great program. Today we welcome Dr. James Hurd as he shares his personal lay testimony about how he's trying to incorporate the latest findings in neuroscience into his classroom teaching. I've taught alongside Jim for 28 years. How long have you been here, Jim? 30? And we've had a lot of conversations about teaching, and I think we both recognize that teaching becomes harder and more mysterious the longer you do it. And we've had lots of conversations about that in 40 years. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I do emphasize the lay testimony. You know, I've never taken a course on education. And it was partly because when I first started teaching, that was the last thing I thought I needed. You know, it took about 20 years to figure that I was a legend, but only in my own mind. And so I've spent the last 20 years, you know, trying to work on pedagogy. Sometimes I feel like I'm one of those participants in a AA meeting, you know. I see myself, hello, I'm James, and I'm a bad teacher too, you know. And let's hold hands and let's work on this together. I want to speak about educational theory, not so much about educational theory, but how I've tried to apply some of this stuff in the classroom, because many of us read this wonderful book called Make It Stick by these guys. And the science of successful learning, wonderful stuff. But then the challenge is how do you bring that into the classroom? And that's the challenge that I face every day. So we're going to start with what I tell a student is an LTL exercise, learning to learn. So I need 2 volunteers for that. And by the way, never ask for volunteers in class, because nobody ever volunteers. So what you do is you choose people. So maybe I'll choose James Lewis will volunteer. Come forward, please.
Oh, I have to come forward.
No, yeah, you have to come forward. And let's get another male. Eric, you can come forward. And so what we're talking about is learning to learn. And why is it that, you know, you study 2 hours and you get a C and your roommate studies half an hour and they get an A? You know, it's really, really frustrating. So if you gentlemen would go over here, this will represent your brains. Who wants to be the stronger student or the weaker student? Okay, you'll be here. So notice that Jim has a little bit more horsepower, a little bit more mental horsepower, and but it turns out that Eric is the stronger student. Why is that? You know, it's not that you have a real high IQ. So when Eric and Jim come into the classroom, they never come in empty. They always come in with structures that they have built very carefully in their brains. And we'll use Legos to illustrate these structures. I love Legos because each Lego would represent like a fact or an idea or a term or a concept. And all the Legos are sticky. All the Legos are sticky, and the strong student is sticky and the weak student is not. So I'm going to give Let's see, you put those back in there because that's already your mental horsepower. And maybe make sure people can see those. And I will give, and I'm up here lecturing away with all this wonderful stuff, and I'm going to give each of these guys a fact, and let's see how that they assimilate that. And so let's see, which is the stronger student, did we say? You're the stronger. And so you're just going to throw these in, and you're going to attach these. You just toss it in, toss it in. See, now the weaker student, looks at it and is fascinated, and then tosses it in, and give him another one here, and give the stronger student another one, and weaker student, and stronger students aren't necessarily coordinated either. Okay, he was texting during the lecture. But it's really a simple concept, but it is really, really true. If I had to say one thing to students, I would say to them, connect. Connect. Don't just, because when it comes exam time, it's a no-brainer for the stronger student because everything's connected. If they can't remember A, they can remember C, and they know how it fits together. Whereas the poor, weaker student, I mean, he studied hard. He's picked these things up and looked at them 100 times. But when it comes to the exam, he just can't handle it. So thank you very much, you guys. Let's give them a hand. Didn't they do an awesome job? So the point is that every fact is sticky, and the stronger student finds out how they stick, and they refuse to learn anything unless they can stick it into something they already know. And you and I as teachers, we try to do the same thing. We try to stick it to something they already know or something we've already worked on in class. So the point for me telling you that is that I do talk to students a lot about LTL, learning to learn. How is it that we can use that half an hour that we've got and be twice as effective in that half an hour or that hour? I never tell them to increase their study time. Everybody knows that. Yeah, I should be studying more. It's kind of like it's Lent. I have not studied enough. Father, forgive me. But the point is that we can increase the efficiency of our study. So today we want to look at LTL. How do we teach our students to learn how to learn? We want to learn some good, we use a lot of acronyms in our class. Learn some good RP, retrieval practices to maximize learning, because after all, by learning, according to Make It Stick book, we mean the ability to retrieve and organize information. That's not all of learning, but you can't do anything else with learning unless you're able to do that. And so we need to give our students a lot of retrieval practice. And then I want to suggest a mastery model that I've implemented in my class that is good, I think, for retrieval practice. And if you're a student, you might want to try out some of these. Have the courage to just change a little bit your study strategies, and you might find a dramatic change. And of course, the irony is that on average, if you're working harder, you're learning more. That's the problem. The coaching metaphor, you go to the gym, and you make your little check sheet, and you hang out, you drink your coffee, and you get the tour by the coach and everything. But it turns out that if you're actually lifting weights, you're going to do better. And in the classroom, if you're struggling a bit with your neuroscience research says that you do better, that you learn better, you learn faster if there's a little bit of struggle, a little bit of heavy lifting. So, learning to learn. This is one example of what I would do I did this in the classroom already. Another example is taking control. Teachers open the door, but you must enter by yourself. Going to class is kind of like going to church, You go in, you haven't read your Bible, you haven't done any prayer that morning, you've got 1,000 things going, you're checking your watch, and and you sit down, you wait for the worship team, the ministers to do things to you. Well, that's a classroom too. So we have to change that mentality. And that's hard. That's really hard for any of us. So I try to do nothing that the student can do themselves. I try to do nothing. For instance, going over a chapter. You may want to do that, but much better to teach the students how to do that. So I try to say, I'm not your encyclopedia, I'm your coach. Building a confident attitude, little things like this, just kind of little motivational things about building a confident attitude.
Retail in Minnesota is connected to consumers,
I think we all need a pep talk.
It's kid president. I got this from my daughter who teaches elementary school.
The world needs to stop being boring. Yeah, boring is easy. Everybody can be boring, but you're gooder than that. Life is not a game, people. Life isn't a cereal either. Well, it is a cereal. And if life is a game, aren't we on the same team? I mean, really, right? I'm on your team, you're on my team. This is life, people. You got air coming through your nose. You got heartbeat. That means it's time to do something. A poem. Two roads diverged in the woods, and I took the road less traveled. It hurt, man! Really bad. Rocks, boards, and glass. My parts broke. Wah! Not cool, Robert Frost. But what if they were too fast? I will be the one that leads
Just
to
kind
awesome.
of little motivations like that, you know, that encourage us to work on motivation a little bit and confidence, because some of our students really struggle just with feeling like they can do it, you know. I forgot how to get that back. It says extend, it's not extending.
You'll probably have to hit escape on PowerPoint and then start it up again. For me.
Thank you, Harry. Try that.
There you go.
Thank you very much. So encourage the students with regard to their own confidence. Another, once again, taking control of your own learning. My daughter says, it's not new with her, that education is what someone does to you, learning is what you do for yourself and to yourself. And so trying to encourage people to take control of their own learning. Once again, and then this idea of failing. Some of us are so paralyzed about failing and we never do anything. This is a great Michael Jordan basketball player quote.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
So the idea of embracing our failures, of course, not just any failure helps, does it? It has to be a failure that you can move beyond, like Thomas Edison's greatest quote is, I did not fail. He said, I just found 10,000 ways to make a light bulb that did not work. And so we see their perseverance and faith, don't we? That is such a wonderful and rare trait. And then, so that's kind of meta-learning, meta-teaching. Now let's look at retrieval practice, which I suggested to you is the way we can demonstrate learning, because the fact is, you and I have sat in lectures, we've watched documentaries, and we don't really know what we learned. And the only way we can know it is by engaging in retrieval practice. Sometimes it's discussion, sometimes it's a review and so forth. And so we try to do a lot of this in class. We call it RP. R-E. Visualize concepts with pictures and diagrams. Like I said to the students, okay, we're studying South America. How do you remember the names of the countries when you have a blank map? And so I said, well, there's this real long, skinny country. It's called Chile. Do you have any way you can remember that? You know? So visualizing a long Chile pepper, what are those kind called that are really long and narrow?
Cayenne.
What?
Cayenne.
Cayenne peppers. Yeah, and so now they'll never forget the name of that country because they're visualizing. And I tell you the truth that my daughter teaches elementary, and I've learned way more from her about teaching than,
The Toyota Corolla is
than I
equipped
have
with Bluetooth
on my
standard.
own. And here's a way to link concepts together with little pictures. And I'd like to go to the video, Eric, but I'm going to lose it again. Shall I go and you'll tell me how to get back?
It's a shape train.
I just dragged the web browser over to the other screen, and then PowerPoint's still behind it.
Square.
So associating the
Circle.
shape with the word and maybe with the color too. So when you visualize the rectangle, maybe you visualize green, and all those things give you more stickiness, don't they? It gives you more stickiness to these new concepts coming in.
Diamond.
So just hit the little button that shrinks the web browser.
Heart.
The whole thing down into the little line in the top right corner.
Pentagon.
Minimize?
Yeah, minimize it.
Okay, then I can't stop it.
Hexagon.
Oh, that's true. Stop it first and then minimize it.
Stop it, then minimize it.
Nice shape train.
Oh boy.
You're learning.
When did I do start it again?
I'll just go grab the web browser off of the bottom taskbar on your main screen.
I'm lost.
Here comes the
Go all the way to the bottom to the taskbar. Out of the PowerPoint maybe?
Down here?
Yeah.
Ah,
Zero.
then I pause it or stop it.
One.
Yeah. Now just go grab the PowerPoint.
Just go
thing
back to
on the bottom
PowerPoint.
bar.
Two.
Can I close this out?
Yep.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, okay. So the point is, you know, building a picture or a diagram, sometimes I'll have the students go to the blackboard and I'll have them draw a picture of what we talked about or a diagram of what we talked about, which of course we can retrieve much better those pictures and diagrams than we can words or things. Then I have two things that I use in class that I demand mastery on. Mastery is defined as getting 80% or higher. One is the quiz, and the quizzes are good for terms, concepts, vocabulary, that kind of thing. And I always have these online, and they're always open book because I have them do this before we ever even talk about the chapter. I have them do it ahead of time, so therefore I want to make it fairly easy for them. And something that Make It Stick taught me is that the best kind of retrieval practice is after you've had a little bit of forgetting. Forget a little bit. Have you ever tried to memorize like a Bible verse? Okay, that's so 20th century. But, you know, and so you get over the verse and you do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again, and you wait 20 minutes, you can't remember it. So waiting, so I build into all my quizzes a 2-hour delay. They can take the quiz twice, but they have to wait 2 hours in between, a little bit of forgetting. It makes it harder to take the quiz. But it's better for you. Now, I'm sure the students have developed workarounds. You know, they've developed workarounds because there's 1,000 ways to avoid thinking, right? And one way is that you take the quiz and you very quickly write down things. And then you get out of it and you go to your book and look everything up and write in the correct answers. and then you go back and then you just fill it in, which doesn't help you at all in retrieval practice, but it's a way to get a little higher grade. These are very low value. They're only worth, you know, a fifth of a point or something like that. But it's a way to get a higher grade, but it doesn't. So I try to emphasize it's for retrieval practice. And one hopes that it encourages, it does encourage reading. The students read much better now because they have these mastery. You can't just blow through it and hope you get, you know, 50% on a quiz. If you get 50%, you get a 0. If you get 80%, you get 100%. So. Low value, not many points, but enough to just a little bit of incentive to do it. And I've gotten almost no student blowback on either this or the little essay I'm going to talk about. Students do not complain about this. I don't know if they're thrilled about it, but they don't. They seem to accept the idea of mastery. And then the other mastery-based work is essays, and this would be retrieving quite different things, retrieving things like an organizational structure, key arguments, and key ideas. So I have them write for 5 minutes in class, and this is always closed book, and it usually is after we've sort of digested the material for a bit. And then on the back of the form we use a brick rubric, and a brick, if I were an educator, I would know what that stands for. I don't know what it means, but I call it brick. Jay Rasmussen calls it brick, so that's what it is, you know. And here's what I did. And I did this partly because the student said, well, your grading is arbitrary, you know. It says, okay, I'll give you a brick. And so here the student, I've asked the student over here to score themselves, to evaluate themselves on these criteria. And then here's where I evaluate, and 80% would be mastery. Then I can always very quickly write a couple brief comments about what would have improved their score. And they can write something if they want there too. And that seems to have worked pretty well. Then I keep telling my colleagues that what I've struggled with for years is to try to get the students to do stuff rather than me doing stuff, have the students do stuff. You know, I feel really bad if I feel like I'm working harder than the students are. I mean, that's really bad. I mean, it doesn't make me a better coach. It doesn't help them be better lifters if I'm working harder than they are. So I try to, and I'm not real good at this. I'm still working at it. But what are some stuff they can do? Go to the blackboard. Hello, first grade. You know, I avoided that for years. I was very embarrassed to send the students to the blackboard. I do it all the time now. Oh, sorry, whiteboard. I send them to the whiteboard, although we have a blackboard in our room. And I have them do all sorts of things. And you want accountability. You want at least their initials, maybe their name, so they own that. And then after they're done with the task, then you can say, well, Julie, you know, what did you mean by this? Or why did you say something different than Sam did or whatever? Stuff to do. Actually, anything that gets them up out of their seats and moving around, divide them into opinion groups. Now, and, you know, how many of you would say that we have no right to criticize Yanomamo marriage practices? You guys stand over here, and you guys stand over here that say we do have a right to criticize the marriage practices, which sometimes involve rape and wife abuse and so forth. And then you can even have a spontaneous debate. Just have them quickly create a debate. It's getting them to do stuff. Walk and talk, I got this probably from Jay or one of the development people. Just get them out of their seats, walking the halls for even 5 minutes or maximum 10 minutes and discussing a topic. Then you come back in and I can say, well, Sarah, you know, you and Kyle, what did you talk about? What did you think about that? And so it does springboard a class discussion, and it breaks up a lecture and gets them doing something. And then lastly, a timeline rope. I have had a physical rope, you know, a long cord. You tie one end to the doorknob and the other end. And then I give them a whole bunch of stuff, and they have to hang dates on this timeline, and then they have to locate things like the Pilgrims came, the rise of the Maya Empire, the rise of the Aztec Empire, the first Spaniards, the conquest of the Aztec Empire, the rise of the colonial states, the rise of the, and so they're hanging these things physically. And I would say, if they're touching that piece of paper and they're writing it down with a magic marker and they're walking up physically and taping it up there, they'll remember forever where they put that right or wrong. There's an old thing that students used to do in class back when I started teaching back in the 20th century. It was called taking notes in class. You ever heard that? Write things down. And, just writing it down, just doing that mechanically is doing stuff, and it helps a lot. Some take-home thoughts, and then it'd be fun to have a little bit of dialogue. We have some time. Learning to learn. I need to teach students the best research-based approaches for learning so that they can change their study strategies. That's the challenge with all of us. For instance, I used to be very embarrassed to tell students how to read books. I was so embarrassed about that. But the reality is I did not learn how to do that well until after I got my PhD, seriously. And I read this wonderful book called How to Read a Book. But how do you read a book about how to read a book if you don't know how to read a book? Anyway, very good. Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book. Wonderful. And so I talked to them about marking your book, about looking for the big things like that. Learning to learn, so doing those kinds of strategies. And then I try to give them a lot of retrieval practice. Make It Stick says that a pretest is very valuable. You don't know, even if you know nothing about the topic, you do the pretest and it begins to activate those neural pathways. You begin to activate things that you already have in your little Lego set there. And so you're primed for learning that if you take a little pretest. And it does help the students discover what they do know and what they don't know. If they do stuff, they will become better learners, is my thesis. And I believe that some of my colleagues disagree with me, and I don't blame them. But I'm very, very convinced that I am not coaching well unless my students are getting better at the heavy lifting. I'm always a legend in my own mind. I'm very good at lecturing and so forth, but it might make me feel good. But bottom line, what does it mean to be a teacher? What does it mean to be a coach? It means to enhance student learning. So, and I can't teach the students that don't show up. I teach the students that come. So how can I reach them, and how can I put some of these things into practice to help them? So. Okay, any comments, questions? What do you do in class that has worked really, really well with regard to enhancing retrieval practice, so when you come to the midterm, students do well on it?
Can you talk more about the BRIC rubric? You have
About the BRIC rubric?
Yeah, you have a section there.
Yeah, we can go back to that. And I got this probably from the J. Rasmussen crowd, and probably all the educators know that. I did not learn this until just a few years ago.
So,
what's the value of it?
no, that's not the student comments and the instructor comments. Which
Yes.
one?
Yes.
Does the student write their comments
Yes.
after you?
Yeah, yeah. They would. You flip this over, and I usually just give them a piece of paper, but now I give them a form for the little 5-minute essay. They put their name in, and is this a redo or the original? I give them one chance on redo, and then when they're done writing their essay, then they flip it over and they self-evaluate. How do I think I did on? Was my answer complete? Was it concise? Did I demonstrate depth of knowledge? Did I? And this is one. This is probably the area that students struggle the most with. They struggle with two things. One is being specific. They'll write an answer that may relate to the Yanomamo, but it will relate to all other tribal groups throughout history and throughout time, you know. And so the specificity and the details, like using vocabulary. I'm looking for them to use vocabulary. That would be the second item. Then the third, I really want to have them give me some evidence that they're interacting with the text, interacting with lectures, interacting with our video, and so forth. And then they can write a comment about how, whatever they wish, and then I can use the other side to just very quickly write a few things that I'm looking for. And oftentimes my comments are always the same. If a student does not master, I always write the same comments. You need more depth, more detail, you need to refer more to the text and so forth. So they can turn it over and look at it, and I hope it helps them for their retake and so forth. That's kind of what I do. It seems to work okay. Samuel.
Yes, I have two related questions. The first one, and from a sociological point of view, I'm interested in pedagogy, but I'm interested in the overarching question of the relationship between learning and the wider society. So Jürgen Habermas, for instance, a German social theorist, said that all knowledge has human interest. There's no knowledge that doesn't have human interest.
No knowledge that is disinterested.
All knowledge has human interest.
Yeah.
So to me, the major concern I have about this in the kind of society we live in is, after all is said and done, the students have mastered the concept. So what about the larger society?
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering whether our society really wants people who are critical learners.
No, not necessarily.
Because if you think too seriously, you're too critical,
Yeah.
even within an organization, organizational studies indicate that they don't like you.
Yeah.
And then, furthermore, if you are a very critical and informed citizen, some of these politicians will not be able to get away with what they do. Okay? So, and I think Mark Twain said something about that. So, I'm just wondering whether even it is really serious that our society really wants people who are really well-informed and critical thinkers.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And so I do some who cares. I mean, who cares about 20,000 naked people that marry their first cousins and run around and shoot arrows and kill each other and drink the bones of the dead? I mean, why am I here? What am I doing in this class? Why do I have to learn about a group of people that I'll never meet, that are not making any impact on the world stage? So I talk a lot about, to understand large societies, one needs to understand small. So I try to talk about the who cares question. Why? Because it's always in the students' minds. It's always, I know I care, but they need to know why they care.
Do some cultures, like the U.S. subculture now, need this metacognition stuff more than others? Why is it Asians blow our students away on science and math, and they don't do all this inquiry stuff? They just lecture and students write it down and they seem to learn it. They even seem to be able to do very difficult problems. They seem to really get it. But in our culture, we need to, these days, do all this stuff, right?
Do we really? I mean, why can't we do what I did 30 years ago? Just get up there and give a wonderful, powerful lecture. Thank you very much. You know, you set the table like Babette's Feast. Babette's Feast, you know, I set the table. Hey,
Because all the data says in our culture it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. I used to do that all the time. I used to get very,
in some
very
cultures it does.
angry.
Why does it work?
Why doesn't it work? Yeah.
I think in the Asian, the two things that are really stand out in the Asian cultures. Number one, you have a culture that assumes anyone who works hard can learn. Where here you got to be born with a math head, right, or you can't do math. There, the assumption is, of course, you're going to learn math. You just have to work your tail off. And number two, they spend a whole lot more time on learning than our kids over here do. They go to summer school. They do homework over summer and Easter break. They all go to cram school in the evening. After school, they go a couple more hours of cram. It's just time on task and hard work. And the expectation from the whole society and the family, of course you're going to learn this. You're not learning it, work harder.
So they're right and we're wrong.
I think
As
that
far
makes
as
a
learning
difference.
is concerned.
you
Yeah,
know.
Angela?
Yeah, I also think, for one thing, our kids are stimulated differently. So they don't sit and just listen to the lecture because of the way they're stimulated and the way that they have learned to learn. And also, a lot of the schools are doing this. So by the time they get to college, they're used to being interactive and getting up and walking and doing all these things and doing things on computers and on their iPads, and they're used to that concept already. So it's almost for them like going backwards to sit and listen. Unfortunately, I think, I know with my girls, it's almost like, oh, we have to sit and listen to a lecture, and we haven't done that for 10 years. Not
Interesting. I have a BYOD policy, bring your own device, and then I try to use it in class. I try to capitalize on it rather than try to keep people from using it. I mean, if I go to church, and I'm not an avid cell phone user, but if I go to church and you tell me that I can't use my cell phone, I'll just ignore you. You know, if I really want to check it. So I think we have to join them and not fight them. And I didn't put it up here. There's something called Poll Everywhere. You can put a poll up on the screen, and everybody can vote A, B, C, or D, yes or no, on their iPad, on their phone, I should say, or iPad, or any other web device, web capable. And the histogram populates. How many say A? How many say B, C, D? It populates before your eyes. I use those if I can ever figure out the technology. The technology is my stumbling block right now. And I would use those for like an opinion survey. What's your level of comfort in the class? You know, what's your emotional temperature right now? Those sorts of things. If I could figure out how to make it work, I would use that. Bob?
Just one quick point there. Qualtrics, our campus survey tool, is coming out with a Poll Anywhere tool sometime this year.
Oh, really?
So we will have an institutional tool that may allow that.
That would be so
Now,
much
I may be
better.
promising something I haven't seen yet, but
I spent
Salesmen are
hours
good.
trying to get this simple little tool to work and have not yet succeeded, but it's probably me. My wonderful TA, Jessica, I mean, I throw up my hands, I start cursing, not quite, and tell the class, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, I tried this for an hour, and always, then Jessica would come up, and very often she's able to figure it out.
Qualtrics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the comment made about Asian students is very fascinating because
Yeah.
in development economics, there's something called the Beijing consensus, which is that we have the Washington consensus, which said here is the only way you can develop, and then the Beijing people went and did their own thing, and they are really making some significant progress. So maybe there is more than one way to do things, and we have to be prepared to admit that.
That's true, and how do we, I mean, let's not give ourselves too much credit. We have a small slice of the students' time. You know, we don't sit with them in church, we don't sit with them with their parents, and, you know, we are not capable of going in and changing the culture at home, changing the attitude towards education of the parents, changing the attitude towards education of their peers. So, you know, we're kind of limited in what we can do given the culture milieu. The math one I love. You know, I can't do math. You know, I hear you. Yeah, and that becomes acceptable. It's something you celebrate. You know, you try not to be proud of the fact that you're stupid at math. It's part of the culture. And how do you break that if you're a math teacher? Thank you very much. We can carry on private conversations if you'd like.